Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Erudition Network. This is our Thursday interactive Black History and Knowledge session. I am your host and founder of the Erudition Network, Eddie Phillips. We do this broadcast every Thursday to help you and your loved ones as we explore Black history and talk about how Black history and how things that affect us still here today. So what we're here to do this evening is to talk about some things. This is an interactive program in that I try to do the program and give you an opportunity to ask questions and to inquest about or query and to give your opinion and to learn together. As I always say, try to learn together and try to figure out this thing, these things that we haven't really been exposed to or taught in school about Black history. The Erudition Network takes a lot of time trying to educate our people. So here we are. On today's session. I wanted to talk about this week Harpers Ferry. We a lot of us don't probably know as much as we would like to know about Harpers Ferry. And if you don't know what I'm talking about John Brown. John Brown, it's in 1859. Led a raid into Harpers Ferry. He led it down south with the idea that he was going to bring liberation to the south and to free the slaves. That was 100 and what is that? That's 163 years ago, before the Civil War. And the thing about John Brown is that I have always found fascinating, regardless of how you label him. Rather, you're one of those that want to label John Brown as a as a criminal, as a person who rebelled against the United States government. However you want to see John Brown, the truth is that his actions were the catalyst for what we know as the Civil War. I'm going to take this off. It's a little hot in here today. But John Brown is an interesting character, interesting person, as far as abolitionists go, because at a time when most abolitionists were talking about, oh, let me talk to some of these comments, people who are, I'm sorry, you all, I wasn't ignoring you. Hello, Maddie. Good to see you. Hey, Dad. Thank you for being with us this evening. Whether you're on YouTube or whether you're on Facebook, I thank you. Thank you. Sean Anthony and Maddie, can we talk about police brutality? That's my youngest son talking about police brutality. I laugh, but I don't know if I should laugh or cry. You know, and what we're dealing with today, that my youngest son at 11 years old wants to talk about police brutality. You know, that says something to where we are. That really does, because we're in a jacked up situation here, ladies and gentlemen. We really, really are. Um, the world seems to be losing its mind, and that's not just America. That's all over. And unfortunately, um, even the young, our young kids, they are victims, and they can see what's going on. We may touch a little bit, Maddie, on police brutality today. We may touch a little bit. Hello, Tina. It's my wife. I'm happy to see you here. No, I really am happy to see you here. Um, you know, we do these programs, and Tina does a program on Monday, and sometimes she would do a pro tips program on Wednesdays. We do these programs to educate and to help people, understand what's going on. And man, we try to reach out to a lot of people, because here's the thing: things aren't getting too much better. I want to send out a thing, to just a quick blurb. For some of you all, I send this out. I'll send out a quick um, social media reminder, because some people don't remember, to tell people, hey, this is interactive. We're live, and we're missing you in the conversation. So you may see that sometimes on Facebook and different things. Well, I'll send that out. And I do that because I understand we all get busy in our day. But the whole purpose of this program is to be interactive, right? To really get people to talk and to explore things that they may not know. So I always try to encourage that. I always try to get people to come on and do that. Anyway, I've segued enough. We're talking about John Brown. John Brown. Let me ask you, the people that are out there, the folks who are on, whether it be my family or others, somebody type in this interactive, what do you know about John Brown? What have you ever been told about John Brown? Real quickly. Could be 2 words. Who do you know? What do you know him to be? Criminal, liberator? Give me your thoughts real quick. I know there is a delay, so I'll give you a little bit of time on it. Man, I look like I'm really sweating on here today. Really not. It's not that hot, but it's a little warm in here. But I want your thoughts on John Brown before I get ready to go down the rabbit hole, so to speak, on the Harpers Ferry raid. What do you know about John Brown? Clicking on some of my notes here. All right. Anybody out there got anything? Let me see what you guys have to say on this. John Brown was an abolitionist. I don't know what that is, Tina. Teddy said he led a revolt and killed people who oppressed who oppressed them with machetes. Okay. There is some truth to that. There is some truth to that. Here's the thing about John Brown. I think what Teddy's alluding to is the Bleeding Kansas incident, in which John Brown, and feeling that he needed to go liberate, if you all remember, that there during the years before the Civil War, there were issues in Kansas. I laugh because I shouldn't laugh too hard because people died. But here's the thing: John Brown led a Kansas raid well before Harper's Ferry, and he led this raid um, because there were people who were trying to make Kansas a slave state. And Brown, feeling that this should not stand, led a raid and went in to the parts of Missouri and Kansas. And basically what he did was, they slaughtered people. And I think what Teddy is alluding to is that when Brown led these men across the border into Kansas, his whole idea was to attack pro-slavery people, homesteaders, and to confiscate whatever land they had, and if they had slaves, to liberate their slaves. Now, this was one of the first raids that Brown did as a radical, if I could use that term, as a radical abolitionist. And this happened a year before Harper's Ferry. But he led those men over, and they really wreaked havoc. He had been sent there. This is the thing about John Brown too. Abolitionists loved John Brown. He was a Christian man. He was he considered himself a very religious man. And so people, abolitionists and anti-slave supporters actually funded John Brown on his Kansas raid and later on his Harper's Ferry raid. They financed him. And what it was to, what word am I looking for here? It was designed in two ways. Brown already knew that his overall idea was to go to Harper's Ferry. Let's just say that. He already knew that he wanted to go in the heart of the South, and what he wanted to do was he wanted to go there and throw the bonds, the chains off of the slaves in the South. He believed that if he could go to an armory, he could get the weapons and things that he needed to be able to arm these slaves to fight for their own freedom and to throw off the shackles of their slave owners in the South. And so one of the things that he did is when he went into Kansas and everything else, this was kind of a deception. So you see, if you consider how far that is, people were so focused on Brown possibly being in the new emerging states that a lot of people who knew him to be radical kind of turned their eyes a little bit from the idea of what he was doing, right? If I could say that. It gave him a way to deceive, to confuse. Something happened. What does that mean? Are you saying that something happened? Okay, I don't know what Maddie's saying here. So anyway, that's kind of what Brown was doing. All right. I am here now. So when we talk about him, I wanted to get you all's thoughts on what you had been taught in school. I know what my sons have been taught. And Sean Anthony, you're absolutely right. He was an abolitionist. That is a huge part of who he was. However, Harper's Ferry was a huge thing because it was intended to be the first stage. It was intended to be something to get the weapons and to take that move and arm others to go in and basically take over. Now, the problem with that is that Brown overestimated the force that would be there, and he underestimated what he needed uh, to take over the armory. And unfortunately, what that led to was slaughter, and it also led to him losing people very close to him, supporters, and then eventually his own life. Because when they went in there into Harper's Ferry, they had specific things that they were going to do. There were specific points and places where they were supposed to go. You know, Brown left some of his people to take over the weapons. He sent other folks out to detach to go free people on plantations. He had too many things moving, and he did not have a lot of men. And famously, what is also mentioned is that, you know, Brown met with Frederick Douglass before the raid. And he got, there's a movie out. I haven't never watched it. I need to watch it called Emperor, but it talks about Shields Green, right? And Shields Green was a friend of former slave and friend of Frederick Douglass. As Shields Green had bought Frederick Douglass to see John Brown. John Brown tried to convince Frederick Douglass to go on the raid with him because he felt that if he took him on the raid, the slaves would be more likely, right, to side with Frederick Douglass. He was not a fool to understand that they may not trust this old bearded white man. But he also understood the significance of having Frederick Douglass, this black free man who everybody knew and was very famous by his side in this cause. So to get Frederick Douglass to go with him would have been a win for Brown. However, Brown declined. He declined because Douglass declined Brown because he understood that this may be a fool's errand. Because at the end of the day, he understood you're attacking the federal government. And what he understood and what Douglass tried to convey to Brown was that you will turn the entire country against the black man. At his last warning, he said, "You will never get out alive." Frederick Douglass understood what was at stake. It wasn't that he wasn't willing to die or to go into mortal combat for his people, for the blacks, to free them. He just understood that in doing so, that he would turn people who were on the crust of being allies against them, and that you would mark the black man again as some kind of animal and creature. And then what would be the result of that uprising on slaves who were still in bondage? We had seen with Denmark Vesey, with Nat Turner, that when uprisings happen, whites called in militia, they called in military, they called in anything to put down black people. There was always the fear of revolt, especially when you consider that there had been a successful revolt in Haiti. So much so that the whites had tried to hide this for years, decades, from the people who were actually still in bondage. So the idea was, we are not going to share that, and we're not going to allow another revolt. And if it does happen, we're going to shut it down. Innocent black people had been killed just because of the prospect of revolt. So Douglass understood that. He got it. However, that did not stop the idea that Brown had, because Brown was committed. He believed that God had spoken to him and told him that he was to lead the black people out of slavery. And Brown understood in his mind that the only way to do this, and he was quoted as saying it, is by blood, through blood. He understood that that was the way to do it. And he was going to do it, no matter what it cost him. When we talk about the fact that John Brown took his own children, sons, daughters, he took them with him on these raids. He was committed. He was committed. Because in the end of the day, he understood what was at stake. And it wasn't just the slavery or the outlaw of the slavery. He believed what was at stake was the soul of man. When John Brown was caught and the raid on Harpers Ferry failed, he was quoted as saying, "You may dispose of me very easily. I am nearly disposed of now," because he had been wounded. But this question is still to be settled. This Negro question. I mean, the end of that is not yet, it is not yet understood. He understood what was at stake. The reason that I talk about it tonight is because we need to understand what Brown was saying and what he was trying to do. I don't support murder, but I will tell you, at the time, he understood that blacks had been murdered. He understood what was going on in the country. And so his idea was that he was not going to allow that. He was not going to support that any longer. He was not going to risk his soul or the soul of his children for the racism that was going on. We have many men that have stood up in history. I recently had my son sit down and watch Schindler's List, when Oscar Schindler paid to save so many European Jews. We have people who try to step in and do things to support and to help. Because at the end of the day, the opposite of racism is anti-racism. And he was willing to take his anti-racism to another level. He had an idea. Harper's Ferry is a catalyst. It's a catalyst. It's so funny because during the time of it, after the raid, Brown was initially considered to be crazy, but he wasn't crazy. Right? I'd say during Reconstruction, and as we got into the Dunning School, which we've talked about here on the network many times, history has painted Brown as being crazy, loony, a kook, a murderer, somebody who shouldn't be in history, somebody that we shouldn't talk about. Right? So from Reconstruction, say from around 1885 until basically up until almost the 1980s, if you were to talk about Brown in school, you talked about this old kook abolitionist. The funny part is that before 1885, before those days, before that, Brown was considered a freedom fighter. Brown was considered by many to be a person who saw the writing on the wall well before the Civil War. But that is not the way we are told. We talk about Brown, as my son said, hacking people up in Kansas, pro-slavery supporters and murderers with broadswords and rusty broadswords. But what we don't talk about, right, is that the border ruffians that Brown was accused of killing, the people who were there murdering whites and blacks, freemen, because they wanted to support slavery, were violent, were murderously violent, and killed many innocent people. And because Brown saw it as a religious fundamental war, because he saw himself as a militant abolitionist, he went in and met their force with force, their terror with terror. Now, we can argue moralistically why and how bad that is. But here's the thing. Even though that happened, he did it to try to send a message. And we don't talk about the people who were burned, shot, murdered, cut, hung by some of the same people that Brown went after. No, we were told that John Brown was crazy, that he was insane, that he was not someone that we should celebrate, not someone that we should admonish. You will notice on this program a couple of times tonight, I have not told you to celebrate John Brown. But what I have told you is that we need to know and remember who John Brown is. You guys are quiet out here tonight. You are welcome to put comments into the program, whether you're on YouTube and Facebook. I welcome your comments, your thoughts, your support, your dissension, your argument, whatever you want. You know, I welcome your opinion. It's still crazy how I will get killed over my skin color. Well, Matthew, when you think about that, and you think about the fact, right, of what you're saying right there, that you can get killed over your skin color. And as we're talking about John Brown tonight, and someone who was not black, but understood or saw the plight of the black man as a religious thing, right? Because, and I was trying to pull up Brown's actual quote. He said, "I, John Brown, am not quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away, but with blood." That was his belief. Because, as Matthew said, it's crazy that you would kill someone or enslave someone based on a color. That's what it is. And let's talk about something else here. The fear of blacks with guns goes back a long way. The fear of blacks with guns is a huge thing with Harpers Ferry, because, see, the idea of blacks with guns always gave the idea of uprising, gave the idea of someone returning on others what you had done to them. People who had shot, burned, all types of things to blacks for centuries, of course, did not want guns in the hands of those same people that they had assaulted. They sent the military down to stop Brown. They made a big display of his execution. This is what they did. But here's the thing. When people who were fundamentally against the idea of freemen met Brown in those days leading to his execution, They actually praised Brown. Brown was praised as far as England. Writers lauded over him. People talked about how you may not agree with this man's philosophy, but his passion, his moralistic idea of what was right and wrong, it stayed with people. It stayed with people. Nobody thought until Reconstruction, until the idea of the lost cause after the Civil War, nobody called Brown crazy. Reporters, jailers, military men, the governor of Virginia, the very state, said he was a man of clear head. Went on far as to say he was a man that anyone who mistakes him of being crazy, they themselves must be a madman. Brown was not crazy, but he did have a moralistic approach to what was going on. He did understand that the only way to do this is that people were going to be willing to die. And he himself saw himself as one of the first people, him and his family, who would die. He's not a madman. He was not a lunatic. And today in 2022, when we are still faced with the idea of people being treated differently, murderously differently, because of their skin, it is something that we should remember. The raid on Harpers Ferry is something that we should look back on. And I challenge you, those of you who are on here tonight, to go and read. Read deeper. I could talk about this all night. But go pick up your books. Go pick up things and read about John Brown. Read about the raid on Harpers Ferry, black, white, or whatever. And read it with an open mind. Read about the man's life with an open mind. It does not mean that you support murder. But what it does mean is that he was willing to understand on a conscientious level to a point where, and I stress this point, who takes their children into that type of fight unless you believe it? When you know that there is huge potential that you will not walk out alive. When he was caught, Brown said, my whole life before had not afforded me one half the opportunity to plead for the right. He also made sure that they understood, had I so interfered in the behalf of the rich, the white, the powerful, it would have been all right. It would have been okay. But he said, the Bible teaches me that all things whatsoever I would that men should do to me, I should do so, even so to them. It teaches me further to remember them that are in bonds as me being bound with them. And I endeavor to act up to that instruction, because I believe that to have interfered as I have done, as I have always freely admitted I have done, in behalf of these poor folks, I did no wrong but right. That was his belief. I pulled that up because I want you to understand what led him. What led him? And folks say, well, he could have done what the other abolitionists did. He could have talked to them. He could have pleaded with them. He could have done everything that you saw Frederick Douglass do. But you know what Brown's actions did? It drew a line. It drew a line with abolitionists. It drew a line with people in the North. It drew a line with politicians. It drew a line with everyone, because then it was realized that there were supporters on all sides of what he did. When Virginia executed John Brown on December 2nd, he was the first man to be hung in this country as a traitor since the Revolutionary War. That's significant. He was labeled a traitor. However, for that traitor, church bells rang in the North. People all over the world, writers, politicians, folks who were world famous, spoke of him. The poet Walt Whitman talked about him. Herman Melville, the writer, Louisa May Alcott, rich, poor, whatever, had their eyes on what John Brown had done. Walt Whitman wrote, "The gaze of Europe is fixed at this moment on America." We need to understand how important that is. I was sitting around and I saw that the anniversary had popped up this week. And I said, we needed to do a show because I don't really think many people understand the importance of what John Brown did. I'm not saying that John Brown was the reason that slavery ended. I'm saying that John Brown was a catalyst. He started something. He pushed something to a radical militaristic mentality before people had railed against slavery and they had been attacked by the general public. Brown was willing to say, folks are willing to die to free these people from bondage. If you go and you look up Civil War songs, you will note that there is a song that talks about John Brown's body, that the Union soldiers would sing. When the 54th Massachusetts marched this way and paraded through Boston, they sang John Brown's body. We need to understand that history. We need to understand what really happened and why John Brown is important. Not as a particular savior, as I've heard some history teachers try to say. I hope next year's skin collection is the problem. It is sad that it had to get to that point where people were willing to die. It is sad. But Matthew, if you look through history, if you look through Black history particularly, you will find people who are willing to die and who have said unequivocally, I am willing to die. Dr. King being one that we know probably more so than anyone else. Because the battle to do what is right may cost lives. It is not easy. We got a chance, as we've said over the last couple of weeks. We were down in Arkansas for my father's funeral. Went down there, and dad's funeral, he had passed away, and we got a chance to go down there and visit some places. And we are still trying to get that show together where we get on and we'll talk about what we saw and what we went through. But when you live history and you go to places, for all of the different places here in America, there are places in your very state, and some of you, your very city, that have historical significance to the struggle by African Americans in this country. or struggles of people of color in this country. And many of us live in these cities and we never go to visit these areas. Maybe because the reality of these areas is too deep, too much. The ghosts of for the lack of a better word, the ghost of these places weigh heavy on us. But it's very important that we go and visit these places. And as Maddie said, it's sad that people have to die. But those places have a point. When the movements arose to go tear down Confederate statues, people missed the idea there that those who wanted to support it, no, they had a point. Those statues were erected in the early 1900s by supremacists who wanted to bring the idea of the failed cause back, who wanted to tell Black folks that though you walk around technically free, you are not. These areas of the country or these places in our cities that we don't go visit, that we don't look at. Go down in the South and look at those areas, those Civil War cemeteries, and look how many bodies are buried there. Look how many people are buried in Confederate cemeteries, fighting to keep others in bondage. They may have had their other issues. Some will argue that some people were absconded and pushed to go fight in the Civil War. Whatever you call it, they are buried by the thousands. When we consider how many people died in the Civil War, it's sad. Matthew, we're all often hoping everyone can just get along and choose to love. That's true. The blood crying from the dirt and the ghosts still there, I think. That's a very poignant thought, my son. And I do think that people think that and believe that. Because the Bible tells you that blood cries out, right? That's an 11-year-old, ladies and gentlemen. An 11-year-old who every week, he's my son, but every week he tunes into this program. And they don't always know what me and Tina are going to talk about. But he always gives you something that is a profound thought from a young boy. And we do this and we try to encourage people to let your children interact with this program. For that reason right there. We try to get you to interact and to reply. Tina talks, I heard her on her show Monday talking about people watching something several times, watch it and get an understanding, and then comment. I've often told people, even if you don't watch Erudition, if you don't want to see my mug on your screen, but you play it in the background like audio podcasts and you just listen, and it'll strike conversation into you. As I talk about the events of 1856, 1859, 1890, as I give you names like Archibald Dunning, John Brown, right? As we talk about these people that maybe you don't have a full understanding on, and then give you something to go look at, to go and study on your own. So then, not only right? Are you learning? But then others around you, you can share that information with them. That's the purpose of the Interact. It's the purpose of the Erudition Network in its whole. And I know a lot of times people are like, hey, man, I ain't got time to be sitting and listening to this kind of history, man. How's it changing my world today? But I'm going to tell you how it's changing your world today. There are laws being enacted in this country right now, that are as repressive as they were post-Civil War, that are as oppressive as they were post-1968. The country is fighting itself. There is a desire to take back things that were given, because there are people in this country who believe they are being replaced. And the fear of that being replaced has driven them insane. Even during the time of the Civil War, you did not have Americans raiding Congress, rushing into Washington. Never before have we had situations like we're dealing with right now on the scale that we're dealing with. States are regressing and telling people who live in those states, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, some parts of Texas, that you can't teach your child or your children about the history of people of color, not just Black history, because they are afraid that if they learn about someone like John Brown and why he thought the way he thought, that will change their minds to how evil it is to be an oppressive person. Matthew, I want you to actually comment, whoever is not, because we don't want the person talking to feel like they're talking to the void. That's my child. It's all right, Matthew. It's not just about the people who are on here right now. It's also about the folks who watch it later. The ones who don't, who see it, watch it for 5 seconds and turn it off, because just like with a lot of other Black history things, it's a little bit too much. The same folks who will tell you that Black history should be taught 365 days a year, but limited to February because that's the only time they want to talk about the struggles. And then complain when we see issues happening within the country. I know we have a good audience for Erudition. We try really hard to grow that audience, and I'm so happy for all of you who help us to do that. You know, earlier this week, I was sitting down with a person, and she asked me, she said, so what is the purpose of the Erudition Network if it's not selling anything? And I said, to educate, to provide you with something that you can go and look up on your own. Not theory, not me just, pontificating and just or just going off about something, but to give you something to go look up, to learn something that maybe you didn't know. Racism and oppression in general has a long memory. Dread it, run from it, hide it. History has a way of catching up with you. Will you be knowledgeable enough to see the change and take action? That is a great, great, great point from my oldest. We could all run away from this. I'm going to leave you with another thought here. I was talking to somebody recently too. I said, a lot of blacks, freemen, they could have ran to Canada. Canada could be the place in the Americas that has the most black people. They could have ran to Canada. Some did. Others stayed. And when you read the narratives of why they stayed, this is even after the Civil War. A lot of people stayed because they believed in the promise of America. A lot of people stayed because, just like a lot of us who want to leave our mother and father's home, that America was home. It was the only home they knew. They had helped to build it, helped to feed it, to grow it. I'm not going to leave where I put all my hard work into. For decades, African Americans have stayed despite the treatment. Despite the treatment. One of the reasons why the Harpers Ferry raid failed also was that blacks, many of them, I do not believe, and Frederick Douglass said it, would not raise their hand to their mama and daddies. I want you to think about that. Think about that. Tina said by the time they were free, they were born here. I mean, Sean Anthony said, heck, they helped raise it from an infant. They quite literally breastfed it. The idea, they fought for it. The idea of that is deep and profound. Blacks fought in every war ever waged, even before the foundation of this country. In the Americas, they fought. They stood beside them at Bunker Hill. The War of 1812, they fought. Even in the Civil War, on both sides. See, we don't have to get into that history a little bit. They fed those Confederate generals. Those generals took their soldiers, their slaves with them. And many of them didn't run away to the other side until it was completely a lost cause. But yet we tell ourselves we should not know this history. Florida has gotten so bad that they are making it that you can't even, certain terms, even for the LGBTQ folks out there, you can't even say it in school. You can't even acknowledge that. Teachers could be fired, and fined. American history is not something that they are willing for anybody to really know. Because as they have said, it makes my kid feel bad. It makes me feel bad. But truth is truth. Do you think that the Germans don't feel some kind of bad that Hitler raised Berlin, basically let it be destroyed, other than surrender, after he had murdered millions of Jews? It's a painful history, but a history that we know all over the world because we share that history, because we tell ourselves we don't ever want a war like that ever again. We don't want the situations that led to World War I and World War II. But we won't talk about Black history, Indigenous folks' history. The Asians who came over here were blown up on the railroads, murdered, had laws written against them. The history of the people of color in this country is so atrocious that it requires us to talk about it. It requires us to talk about it. We talk about the Alamo. We brag about the Alamo. And I found for many years, many people don't even know about the Alamo. Remember the Alamo. And don't consider the fact that people went to Texas, or what we now know as Texas, with the idea of owning land and continuing to own slaves. That the Mexican government, Spanish government, had long since said, no, we're not doing that. And when they were getting booted out of the area, they rebelled. They fought back. They decided they weren't going to leave. But that slavery part is often left unknown, not talked about, not important. Not important. You know, as we get ready to close out this program, I got a book today. I've been trying to get this book for at least about 10 years. There are many reasons why whenever I would order this book, I couldn't get it. And it's a really, really good book by Donna Bogle. And, you know, me being a person who spent a lot of time in film in my younger years, I wanted this book. And so I'm gonna put this up because I really think you should take the time, because we're gonna do a show talking about this book once I get through it. Yes, and that is what the title is: Toms, Coons, Mulattoes, Mammies, and Bucks. And how imagery and ideas were presented in American films and taught generations on how they view Black people. And it goes along with the idea of rewriting history, revisioning history. If we look at Birth of a Nation, which we often talk about, everybody sees Birth of a Nation as this thing that promoted the Klan. And that is true. And we saw the rise of the Klan in the 1920s almost just due to that, because of that imagery. People, even where I'm in Colorado, who were members, honorable, loving, whole members, Christian members of the Ku Klux Klan, because of Birth of a Nation. Movies and things teach us. I used to tell my sons, visual is everything. What you see is what you believe. And folks believed it. When you see the pimps, the killers, the thugs in the 70s and the Black exploitation movies, people believed it. And the next generation of hip hop wannabe that came after that in the present days of film, who saw themselves as thugs and thought that the idea of thug, hoodlum, roughneck, these were honorary terms, who saw the idea of hustling and drug dealing and pimping as good things, because that's what they had seen as kids growing up. I'm gonna read this book. Doesn't take me long to read books. That's not a braggadocious statement. It's just the truth. And we're gonna talk about this coming up. And I may try to get some people to come on. So it's not just me ranting and raving for an hour. But I want to get into this whole history of Black film, even if we do it sectionally, and talk about the early days, and then go into the new Negro, and then go take that into where we are presently. But I think we need to talk about that, because as we're talking about tonight with John Brown, as we talked about with the laws that's being changed, as we talked about, as my son said, that the idea of your color still holds you into a situation where people can mistreat you. We need to investigate how the media, how the ideas, how the films, music, everything is radicalizing, encouraging. People will listen to a Kanye West. Why? Because they've called him a genius because of the music that he put out. They'll listen to some of these black directors, even though the black directors have sat here and said they are sellouts. They'll watch these actresses and actors who have told you consistently that they do their roles for money and are not like the Cicely Tysons of old or the Sidney Poitiers of old, who look through the role and say, well, this is not going to support my culture. We need to talk about that. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you. I did not look on YouTube or Facebook as I was doing this today. And I think we streamed to just a limited amount of channels today. But I did that because I don't want any technical issues anymore. I want you to go to YouTube, encourage your friends, your pals, your loved ones to go to YouTube, subscribe to the Erudition Network, watch Adroit Living on Mondays, watch Pro Tips on Wednesdays when Tina can do that program. Join us on Thursdays. And if that doesn't work for you, let us know so that we can adjust to reach the people where they need to be reached. Share this program. Don't just assume that it will always be here, that we will always be here to teach and to try to give people what they need. Help us so that we can grow to help others. I took away all the green screen and things in the back because in the end of the day, the message is so much more important than the presentation. I believe that. We may get back to that. But we really, really need your support because there are people out there in need. You know them. You see them in your community, in your surrounding area, those who don't know anything about history, those who don't know anything about who they are, who have no knowledge of self, who don't know how to go out and get treatment, who see things as one way and feel lost, hopeless. People oftentimes push and support the people with the narrative. That is the pipeline. We'll see it clearly only when we are tired of hearing it. So true. We could be doing a lot of different things, but we find it important to get on the days that we get on. And it ain't always easy. I'm just going to be real with you. But the importance of it. My wife talks about self-soothing. That's so important in the Black. I speak particularly of the Black community, the culture. Because when we don't self-soothe, we react. We do things due to stress. We do things due to bad judgment. When we don't know how to reach out for help. When we don't know that maybe sitting there looking at a fish tank, having a dog, taking a walk, just learning to sit down and meditate and think, be to yourself or you and your God. We don't show the importance of that. And when we discuss it with people and we bring people on who've lived through these things, it's important. Don't be the person, as I think Maddie said, that just sits there and watches. You ain't got to comment, but please share. Somebody might need it. That 11-year-old boy said something tonight that is so profound, so touching, and he's 11 years old. That blood cries out. Our ancestors wanted us to be better. They wanted us to be better. They died for us to be better. They died with the hope that we could be better. And that blood cries out. Let's not ignore it. We'll join you again here next Thursday for the interactive. Please, please, please subscribe to us and support the network. And ring that bell. Get a notification, because there are times where we do special programs, special episodes, and we want you to know. We will put out advertisement for it, but we want you to be able to know. But until next week, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you. I thank you for spending this hour with me, a little bit over an hour. I gave you about 5 extra minutes, But until next week, you be blessed. Go out there and read about the Harpers Ferry raid. Go pick up that book. Go pick up the Tunes, Coons, Mulattoes, Mammies, and Bucks by the author Donald Ogle. Read it so that when we do the show, you can talk to it. But until next Thursday, we will hope that you have a great and wonderful weekend, and we will see you soon. Thank you.